Hello, everybody. How you doing? See, just because Lindsay just reminded me that just because I can't see everybody's faces doesn't mean they're not all there. So yes, you've all kind of signed on. And as ever, we always run these sessions as meetings from a Zoom perspective. So if you want to put your camera on, feel free to put your camera on. If you want to unmute yourself and join in the conversation, do that as well. So you'll see lurking behind me, Lindsay is here with me today. So I'm Eileen Rowan, this is Lindsay Scott. Lindsay's there in the background because she's actually going to be doing the scribing as we go in. So I'm just going to give a few more minutes to people to join us. Ever when it comes to lunchtime sessions, it usually takes a few people after 12 o'clock to say, oh, it's 12, better log on to the webinar. So we'll wait and see those people arrive. While we're doing that, feel free to open the chat window and in the chat window say hello, tell us where you're from, tell us, especially if you're in the UK, whether you've had any rain recently, because that's where the celebrations are. At the moment, my husband actually went out and stood in the rain just to be grateful for a bit rain. So say hello, where you're from, and we'll just kind of start the session in a couple of moments. So we've got nobody brave enough to put the camera on today, so I'm going to spend the whole session looking at myself as a way goes.
Put your cameras on, because with these summer series sessions, it's actually all about your insights and stuff. So it doesn't matter if you're munching on a sandwich, it's absolutely fine. It'd be lovely to see some faces.
Yes. So I wanted, one of the other things that I say this now to people who are actually who join Zoom. In your Zoom profile, you've got the opportunity to add a picture. So it means even if you haven't got your camera on, we do actually see your face, which is always nice to see. So here we go. So we've got a few more people joining us. We've got Mr. or Mrs. Rogers, some S. Rogers, over in Peterborough, nice and sunny. So you've not had the rain. I drove up to Manchester this morning, so it was a bit cloudy and a bit misty. I thought I was going to have some rain, but not having any at all. Right then, so we've got a few more people joining now. A slightly damp Glasgow. That sounds joyous. Yes, slightly damp. There we go, and a camera. Excellent, Lorna. You're saying Nicole's come on, demonstrated that even if your camera's not on, we can still see your face if you've got a photo associated with your profile.
It's just quite hard to do if you're on an iPad or something, because I don't think you can, but there you go.
Yes. So just a couple of things then. So we are going to use some of the functionality of Zoom. So we're just going to have a little bit of practice of that in a moment. So for those of you, just to kind of orientate exactly kind of where you've come in, and I've just seen somebody's in from Trinidad and Tobago. I suspect, Diane, you probably are not having rain and having the lovely sunny weather. And we've got Hamburg, which is slightly cloudy. I do love Hamburg. So we're here today to talk about the summer series. It's actually the last in the series that we've done, which is the output from the Pmo conference. Oh, look, I apologise, Ms. Bernardo, that I can't pronounce your first name. Rocio, possibly, if it's Spanish of origin. These are the things that were came up at the conference. So we actually had kind of 4 things at the conference, and this is the last one. So as Lindsay said, as we go through the session today, we are really going to be looking forward to your input. So it isn't going to be me talking all the time. So in order to do this, we just want to practice for those of you who are doing Zoom on the app on your PC. So for those of you who can, in your menu, you should have something called annotate. If you click on that annotate, it will bring up another menu which allows you to actually, as it says on the tin, actually annotate the presentation. So if I take the text, click on text, I can then click on a box, type my name. Oh, if I can actually spell my name, and people can see it there in the presentation. So if you can do try that now, and we'll see how many people can actually kind of type in. Excellent. So we've got Kayang who's managed to do that. Excellent, Nicole, Lucy. So yes, so we've got a few people who can can join in. Now, because you're either doing it through the browser or you're doing it on your laptop and your phone and you can't do it, don't worry, feel free to put your contribution into the chat or unmute yourself, join in the conversation, and Lindsay will be adding your input to the big screen behind. So yes, so a few of us have playing. So is that Lindsay drawing pictures with your eye?
You could do that on the iPad. I'm really impressed with the Zoom app.
Okay,
there you go.
There you go. Smiley faces then from Lindsay in the Zoom app. Now the only thing is, just to be clear, we're recording this because Lindsay will go back and have a look at all of those annotations. If I kind of go to the next slide, you'll see that if I kind of come off that, if I go to the next slide, you'll see it'll take all of the annotations with us. So what I have to do is I have to delete the annotations at the end of every slide. So let me just do that now, and then we can move on to the next slide. And when it comes to annotation, you'll see the little post-it notes that you can join in on. So as I said, we've done 4 sessions. This is the final session. We've done hybrid delivery, we've done benefits management and resource management. And this final one is law maturity. Now, these were all subjects where we were continually getting requests and having conversations about people saying they were having some challenges and struggles with these particular areas. So we thought we'd put some boards up at the conference. So at the conference, we went up and we had a blank screen. We've done those. We had a blank screen of law maturity organisations and asked people to fill in, write some comments, ask some questions, and we're going to go through what they did and what they wrote up there, but we're also going to ask you to add to that, discuss that, challenge it, question, supplement it, extend the discussions a little bit further. But I thought it was worth just kind of speaking before that to talk about, well, what do we mean by maturity? Because maturity can mean a number of things to different individuals. So I kind of picked the 4, which I thought were the four most obvious ones in terms of maturity. So whether we're talking about project, program and portfolio maturity in the organization, whether we were talking about the project and program managers maturity, so in terms of their competence, whether we're talking about PMO maturity, or whether we're talking about maturity of the people who work in the PMO, so PMOs as I will call them, in terms of competence. And it's interesting to kind of note where thinking is in these 4 aspects of maturity, because certainly the one that I'm going to highlight first of all is when it comes to PMO's maturity, it was only last year was there actually some kind of recognised consistency in terms of how to measure PMO competency. The project management maturity, project management competence, there are a range of different competence frameworks we can use to measure individuals' competence. So whether that be from the APM, whether it be OPM 3 from PMI, I know Praxis framework has got one embedded in there. So there's a range of things around PM maturity. In terms of P3M maturity, there are also a number of models, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of information on one at the moment on P3M maturity. So whether that's P3M3, whether that's the one from PMI, the OPM from PMI. Again, Praxis has got another one in maturity. There's also a free one in a book by Kersner that you can use. So different ways of measuring P3M maturity. The one that's still missing and is under great debate is, what does PMO maturity look like? So the argument is not kind of, do we understand, kind of how we assess what a mature PMO is and what's not. The question is, what indicates a mature PMO? So it isn't just necessarily how long you've been in existence, because we know lots of old PMOs that are still really struggling to do what needs to be done. But what is it? Is it the skills and capability of the people within it? Is it the the acceptance by the organization? Is it what percentage of projects that the PMO has oversight and over? Still hasn't been decided. So it's an interesting kind of watching brief in terms of how we do those kind of metrics and measures around PMO maturity. So when we kind of set up the board, it was really a case of we left it to the audience, to the contributors, to decide on which particular elements they wanted to pick up. And you'll see, and I'll go through as we go through the board, how it was a mixture of all of those. But I did just want to give a view of P3M maturity, because this is where a lot of the comments were. And just for those people who weren't necessarily or not necessarily aware of the kind of the various models that are around there. So this is the one that's kind of taken place from P3M3 in terms of maturity, starting off from kind of level 1, which is really, well, as an organization, we recognize that we need to do projects and we need to do elements of projects differently to how we manage business as usual. Level 2 says, actually, we know that we've developed a few ways of doing it. We've got perhaps a method, but it's not really used consistently around the organization. So we've got pockets of excellence. When we get up to level 3, we're in a position where actually we've got a defined way of working and it delivers good projects for us, and the projects that we've got in delivery follow that process. And a lot of people actually kind of quite like to get to level 3 and maintain a level 3. Once we get up to level 4 and level 5, level 4 is really about kind of in that place where we are, it's a constant refresh, because we're looking at kind of how we're organization is moving on, the different types of projects that we're doing, the lessons learned, and improving that so it constantly stays relevant. And level 5 is a kind of the next stage on again to that, says we're not only learning from, we're not only kind of improving it from lessons learned, but we're actually looking into the future, and we're looking at what kind of projects and programs we're going to be delivering in the next kind of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. So we are proactively developing how we deliver projects and programs to cope with our future delivery. Now, the really interesting thing is, having done a number of P3M3 assessments, we actually found that we needed to create a level 0, because there were a number of organizations who were really kind of struggling and coming to terms with the fact that actually undertaking a project isn't business as usual. So they were still in a position where they were trying to get their head around, how do we do projects? Why are they different? So they hadn't actually reached kind of that level 1 maturity. So in the official model, it goes 1 to 5, but in reality, there are still some people who are sitting at level 0. And there are some benefits of going from level 1 to level 5. As I say, most people are relatively comfortable at level 3, but actually level 1 basically says is that whenever we put a plan together for a project, we set a target date, which you can see there is target N. The likelihood of us finishing early is quite small, but it literally could be any range of times after that event. When we get to level 2 of maturity, we set our target, and we could finish early, we could finish a bit late, but actually there's still it's really just a guess when we're actually going to finish in that target. Once we get to level 3, you can see that actually once we set that target, an awful lot of the projects hit that target or there and thereabouts. And that's really where organizations want to get to, a level of consistency and ability to be able to kind of achieve what they set out to do. Because once they've got that kind of predictability of when the project's going to deliver, they can actually kind of do a lot more kind of planning around the business in terms of how they're going to get the most of what's been delivered by the organization. And as we see level 4 and level 5, we're reducing that spread to kind of getting to those projects on time, on budget, and to quality. So just for those of you who weren't kind of completely clear about the levels of P3M maturity, I thought I'd just kind of put that out there. They're included in the slides. It's definitely not a presentation about P3M maturity. So let's have a look at kind of what was actually done in the conference and what people wrote. So you'll see there's quite a few boxes that are filled in, and we'll go and kind of whiz around the board and see what's in there. And as we go around the board, you'll in the next subsequent slides, you will see some post-it notes to the right hand side. So if you want to start scribbling, feel free. You'll start seeing Lindsay starting to kind of have some scribbling on the board. But really what I don't want to do is have a conversation with myself over the next 40 minutes. So really looking forward to having a conversation with you. So feel free to take yourself off mute. You know, as Lindsay said, if we hear the kind of the chink of your gin glass, I mean your cup of tea, or you know, kind of your munching on a sandwich, feel free, but it would be good to have some discussion. So just going to kind of kick off that first question. When we talk about low maturity, what was, you know, when you signed up for this webinar, when we talked about low maturity, which aspect of maturity were you thinking we were going to cover? Just out of curiosity, because it might change some of the conversations as we go through. Nobody's talking to me this morning. Okay, so we've got one input from PMO maturity, okay, which is we can talk about that in terms of kind of what that means in terms of the PMO life cycle. So we the House of PMO within their certifications talks about a PMO life cycle in terms of set up, run, transform and close, and potentially in that kind of setup and run we can kind of get better and better and improve through the transform. So we can mention a little bit about that. We've got somebody writing on the board in terms of PMO maturity as well. So excellent. Right then, so let's go on to the first bit of the board and look at what our delegates at the conference had around what they thought was the real problem. So interestingly, there's quite a few bits here around the PMO. So I'm going to kind of find a couple of those and probably just kind of bold them so we can see them. So certainly in terms of finding a sponsor who will own the problem is typically ones where we've got low maturity in the PMO. And also lack of a clear remit. That's done something strange. Here we go. Lack of the clear remit by leadership, definition of needs by the organization or the department. And also, I'm assuming people churn, that's around kind of people in the PMO sticking around and doing what needs to be done in the PMO. Anybody on the call actually in a young PMO that's still struggling to find out what needs to be done? Anybody?
Yeah, Lucy.
Eileen, I can add in, I've just moved teams within the place that I've been contracting into sort of very practically non-existent PMO.
Okay.
In that space of trying to bring in very early days portfolio management, support that, which a bit of all of that leadership staff who's sponsoring it, the whole what's it there to do whole thing. So yeah, literally about a couple of months into it.
Okay. Lucy and Roger, Lucy and Steve, sorry, anybody want to open the mic and just tell me a little bit about your PMO?
Yeah, sure, I can. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I can give you a bit more info. So yeah, I've just started a new role, having previously sort of been more project management based, but now I've got like a blended role within a different company with quite a sort of, I guess on a much smaller scale, working in IT, but it's really about establishing some sort of fundamental practices of how we tackle projects. So I'll still be doing some project management work, but also as well helping set up PMO and kind of all the standards and governance and everything that we have in place around that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for talking, Steve. Lucy, are you happy to talk?
Yeah, so it's kind of a bit different with me. So I started my new role maybe in 2019, I think it was, and the PMO was one person. So then it was just the two of us. Over that time since then, we've developed a kind of framework and we've got a portfolio, but it's just kind of trying to get people to use it, which is the issue for us. So it's like low maturity in that way, is we've kind of got the basics there, but it's trying to get people to, you know, use those kind of things and, you know, help us with it.
Okay. And I think, you know, all of the kind of best management practice, when we talk about setting up a PMO, and it was ratified by Amerigo Pinto when he spoke at the conference in June, is that in order for our PMOs to be successful, we need to understand why it's been set up. And, you know, there's a couple of, you know, suggestions in there. And what the real problem is finding a sponsor, getting the stakeholders on board, and making sure that people understand what it's there to do, to get their input in terms of what they want the PMO to do, and not just what they want the PMO to do, but how can the PMO help them make a difference in their ability to deliver projects and programs. So there's some really kind of interesting stuff which we'll kind of come on to in terms of things that we can do about how do we find our sponsor, what who's asked the PMO to be set up, who's asking us to do things, who are we doing things for, to really find a person who says, actually, it was my idea to set the PMO up. And I think we often struggle in this area where you've got somebody in an organization who, and I did it for a while in an organization where I kind of came from a project management perspective, said actually we could really do with a PMO, and I was not senior enough to be able to sponsor a PMO or get funding. And it really took a long time. Well, it took 3 years. I know exactly how long it took. It took 3 years to really get somebody who was prepared to say, well, actually, Eileen, I agree. Right, then let's put my hand in my pocket. Let's use my seniority. It was one of the directors. Let's use my seniority to make things happen. And I think without that kind of clear sponsorship, we're going to kind of really struggle to actually kind of drive. And as you've said, Lucy, to get people engaged, because it's us kind of trying to sell our own ways. Well, actually, if you've got somebody who's your PMO sponsor who says, I have created the PMO to do this for the organization, and project managers, you need to engage, sponsors, you need to engage, senior managers, you need to engage from a portfolio, is really the route to understanding what we're about and what we're there to do. And as I said, it can take not an insignificant amount of time to actually kind of continue doing some of the day job, whatever that looks like, but actually get somebody who's really prepared to sit down with us and actually work out what it is we want to do. And I think one of the challenges that kind of sits around having a low PMO maturity is typically it's also indicative of a low project and program management maturity, because all of the PMO models, all of the project management maturity models say you're not going to get anywhere close to a level 3 without having a good PMO in place. So typically, you know, you're going to find PMOs that they're going to be level 1 and level 2 before you kind of get really understanding of kind of what projects do for the organization, and therefore how PMOs can help. And even after we've got PMOs in place, getting people to really understand what that means and how it adds value can take an additional kind of time period to get it in place. So I think, you know, if you're a low maturity PMO in a low maturity organization, you've got a double bubble to actually kind of contend with. But I do think there's a great opportunity, and certainly from my perspective, the challenge is getting 1 or 2, even if they're not particular senior, 1 or 2 advocates for the PMO who use the PMO, who can start talking about some of the benefits and the value the PMO can bring. Anybody want to add anything down the post-it notes in some of the other real challenges of PMOs? So you're talking about PMOs maturity and competence. I was doing a session earlier this week, and we were having this exact conversation. One of the delegates who I was speaking with, they're establishing a PMO, and one of the things that they've identified is their recommendation back to the organization is to say, well, actually, when you're establishing a PMO, having people with higher levels of maturity, PMO competence, is required, rather than once we've got the PMO established and cranking that handle. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to attract somebody with those kind of greater PMO competencies to actually do that establishment, though a lot of people actually kind of like the idea of actually setting it up and find running it less of a challenge for them to do on a day-to-day basis. There was a question there in terms of how many companies involve the personnel without any PMO experience in the past, and it's been fascinating. So one of the things that's come out of the courses, so House of PMO have got a certification which is PMO Essentials for Administrators, and one of the things that we've identified on the delegates who come on that administrators course are often people who have been PAs or executive assistants who've been asked on behalf of the organisation, because they've been kind of speaking to the key people who've been accountable for projects. You know, can you get a report from those people on a regular basis? So at the board meetings, we've got an update on those projects. And then the kind of the term of a PMO has started to be bandied about, and we're finding people at the administration course are actually being asked to set up a PMO on behalf of the organisation, and they don't have any project management experience when they come into doing that role. And it really is a kind of what we find is people who come in at that point are actually really starting to set up reporting. So it is an element of PMO, but they don't necessarily understand or have the authority to set up the full remit of the PMO, which is all of the kind of the capability to support the organisation to develop project and programme management capability. So hopefully that's kind of where we are. Interesting. Steve, just out of curiosity, did you apply for that as a new role? So how did you kind of go from being, I'm going to use these words politely, just a project manager to a project manager who now has the wonderful gift of a PMO to develop and look after?
So it was an opportunity that just happened to come up. I was kind of just contacted about it, and I found it quite exciting, to be honest with you. It was just an opportunity to try something a little bit different.
Okay. And I think there's having some project management experience, program management experience has got some value in that, because you understand what you're trying to support and deliver. But one of the reasons why the House of PMO was set up, one of the reasons why we did the PMO competency framework, because we recognized there was kind of similar knowledge in terms of what is risk management, but different in terms of your accountability of a project manager to potentially how you're going to support the project manager and the organization and ensuring risk management is done on projects across the organization. So very similar knowledge, and the PMO competency framework then talks us through what is required to be able to implement and drive risk management in the organization. So same knowledge, different perspective. Couple of bits in there in terms of some additional challenges is when the strong sponsor moves on. And I think that linked to that is when a PMO is seen to be established, whether people recognize there's still a requirement for a sponsor for the PMO. And I would argue yes, but I think a lot of organizations say, well, it's so well established that actually, you know, the PMO director, the PMO manager has enough credibility in the organization to carry that on. And I would say that might be the case if that PMO manager, that PMO director continues to report on the value add that the PMO brings. Or the danger is when we've got a new change at executive level, they kind of say, well, what does that PMO do? Surely we've got good project and program managers. We potentially don't need the PMO anymore. So we either continue to need that advocate, or we need to continually kind of reinforce the value that is brought to the organization by having a PMO in place.
Can I add my one in?
Let's go.
My observation, having worked around recruitment for a long time in the past, often you would get organizations reluctantly coming to you because in their organization, well, it's project management, you just do it, don't they? Yeah, so there's this feeling of actually not recognizing that there's a whole like professionalism around projects. So that was one of them. So it's about what the organization thinks about projects is you know, as a whole. And the second one, well, oh God, I just lost my train of thought now. So there's the organization not really giving project management its due, you know, focus and care and stuff, and you see that a lot with things like, oh, the organization will just oh, we're just looking for people with Prince 2, no thought at all to actually this is how we do projects here. They've got none of that, like
localization.
Yeah, and it's not even a thing. And I think the other thing, I've just remembered, the other thing is that I think a lot of people think that lots of organizations out there have got it cracked. But actually, God, there must be loads of people out there working in really mature organizations. And I would say that it's not the norm. It's not the norm at all.
And I would make a sweeping statement in all of the organizations, or the majority of organizations, and the majority of people who we see are trying to move to a more mature organization, but they've got lots of work to do.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing which is quite interesting, which I saw firsthand for a couple of organizations, is just because you establish a level of maturity, you don't stay there. Yes. There is that we can establish a level of maturity. Some people move on, and you know, people have mentioned here when it kind of a strong sponsor moves on, you can kind of something will happen in the organization, or we have something like the pandemic and all of the portfolio needs to change and we're doing a different type of project, or we've introduced agile. There's lots of things that will impact the organization that actually the P3M maturity, their ability to deliver projects and programs, can actually kind of take a dive. You know, you lose a couple of key people from the PMO, and the ability of the PMO to be able to do what the business requires kind of drops as well. So interesting in terms of kind of, you know, kind of, it's not just about kind of getting up to that hill, but it's actually kind of staying up that hill, and PMOs have to continually morph and change and continuous improvement to maintain their level of maturity, but also the maturity of the organization. One more thing that I just want to say about this in terms of the challenge is that it's hard enough in a PMO when you're introducing a PMO to an organization who's got an inkling about what project management is all about. You're almost having to fight a double battle if your organization isn't aware of projects, programs, and the difference, what a portfolio is, the benefits of portfolio management, and what it is, you know, kind of what's required of the various roles, because they see the project manager as the same as a project sponsor in terms of their accountabilities. So I think kind of just recognizing that the challenge that's ahead, and starting off, and it'll come on as we kind of go through the board, starting off with a kind of, well, we're not going to be able to do everything today. It's going to take some while to actually kind of make those things happen, is really an important part of where we go in this. So let's have a look at what the delegates thought was the biggest blockers. And there was only one thing that was highlighted. I think we've got some other things in terms of things that are stopping us, but really was perception and contribution. Now, my assumption is, and I can only assume what the person was talking about, but this to me is not about project and program management maturity. This really is about PMO maturity, about what the organization's perception is of a PMO. And a lot of that is how much baggage, what experience people have had of PMOs in the past, and how the contribution of the PMO is perceived. And we often see, if projects are continuously failing, that sits on the shoulders of the PMO, because we haven't got the right processes, we haven't got the right tools, you know, everything takes too long to happen. However, as soon as projects start to be successful, then that's because the project manager is doing a fantastic job. So it's really interesting in terms of, you know, kind of how people perceive what our contribution is. And again, one of the really kind of things that we need to work at is recognizing what is it that we do that is going to make a difference to project and program delivery, and actually start setting ourselves some metrics and measures around that. So, you know, if we're going to start doing some risk identification workshops, we're going to start auditing risk registers, or even maintaining risk registers on the organization, on the project manager's behalf, it's because we, you know, the organization needs to improve risk management. So we're doing those things specifically because the organization has a need. And in 3-6 months time, where we're starting to see risks being properly mitigated and not turning into issues, yes, the project manager is doing their job in terms of managing those risks, but actually we've played a good contribution to that because of our focus and our support to the project managers in the risk management processes, templates, training, support, and workshop facilitation. So anybody else want to say what their kind of biggest blockers are in low maturity? So whether that's from a PMO perspective, whether that's a P3, M3 perspective.
I'll have one if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Where to start?
Okay. Yeah, that seems a fair one. Yeah, where to start. I always said it's nice to work in an organization where you know you can make a difference. The challenge is knowing where to start, because every stone you kind of upturn is you find a whole load of other problems. So we've got a couple of other expectations, which are, you know, which I think is a really good one, because in the expectations, people can often come and say, in the last organization I worked with, the PMO did this, or I want the PMO to provide a really kind of detailed administrative support, or actually I think the PMO should be providing all of the training for the organization. And I think we've referred to it a few times in terms of the PMO service catalogue that's out there, in that a PMO can do a whole range of things. And it's about really getting to that point where we understand what this organisation, or this part of the organisation, actually needs us to do, and to deliver that to make a difference for them to overcome their immediate problems. And I think Lucy just put something there in chat, but also in terms of, Sophia had put in there, also linked to something that's been written on the board in terms of trying to bring people on the journey with you, and resisting the following processes. And one of the things that we often find the challenges is we're the only person who's beating that drum. Yes, actually kind of, you know, kind of there are processes to follow, there are templates to be completed, there are things that you can do, techniques that we can kind of employ during project delivery that will help you to deliver projects. And I think there is the challenge without a PMO sponsor who says the organisation has an issue, and I'm going back to use the risk management one, the organisation has an issue with risk management, and therefore we've asked and set up the PMO to specifically address and drive solutions to some of the problems that we've got in project delivery, and actually hold the project managers and the sponsors accountable for doing things, and not just the PMO. So at no point, you know, is the PMO actually accountable for delivering projects and programs. What we're there to do is to help the project and program managers, and it's really providing the desire from the project and programs managers to come to the PMO for help. So a bit of that by bringing the people with you. It shouldn't be the PMO who's banging the drum. It should be the organisation, the senior managers, the people who are actually wanting the projects to be delivered better. I love this one, Sophia, about kind of poor management behaviours, because absolutely, in terms of driving the right behaviours for the organisation. And one of the things that we've found to be quite helpful in that is actually looking at the values of the organization and articulating how those values can be played out in project, program and portfolio delivery. So that might be a good way to address that. So I like that, Ruthia, that you put there in terms of kind of whose side are we on? And I think this goes back to kind of what are we there to do as a PMO, as to some of the services that we provide or actually are delivered out to the project and program managers. Some of the services that we provide are there to the senior executives. And I think it's about being able to join the bit in the middle that says, actually, project delivery has a full end-to-end from initial kind of sponsorship and investment from the senior managers so they can drive the business forward, to delivery on the ground of individual kind of projects and programs. And very often we can sell ourselves as the honest broker that is trying to match and help people do those two elements that sit together. So thank you for that contribution. Again, I'll just kind of clear all of those drawings so we can move on. And the next section we're going to look for in terms of what is the kind of the dream outcome for us as a PMO and our organization. And I kind of, I have to say, I was quite interested in this very kind of first bullet point where somebody dreamed of 100% compliance for documentation. And to me, that's a real challenge in terms of, do we really care about documentation, or do we care about projects and programs delivering effectively and efficiently for the organization? And I would suggest that actually our focus should be on the latter. But what we need to do is demonstrate how that documentation and how completing that documentation actually supports and is a contribution to more successful delivery of projects and programs. And I think the other kind of the other word in that sentence that I really kind of struggle with is the word compliance. And I think we are very much driven by compliance, and we see compliance reports being presented from PMOs. And one of the things that I often talk about is actually, rather than driving for commitment for compliance, actually driving for commitment to follow processes and complete the documentation. Now, in terms of the end result, you know, you could say, well, actually, it's the same, because both of kind of commitment to do it and doing it is the same as compliance. And I think the difference is the time it takes to get that. Sometimes it can be much quicker to get to compliance if you've got a big enough stick. It takes much longer to win the hearts and minds of people, to actually get them to understand why that documentation needs to be filled out, how that documentation contributes to project success, and get them to recognize actually it's their accountability to produce that documentation. And they start saying, well, I can't understand why anybody would think I could do a project without having a risk register and a project plan. You know, it kind of just doesn't make sense to them. But getting people to that position is actually a much harder slog than saying you're going to be beaten over the head and reprimanded unless you've got a project plan. And potentially you get much more ownership. And so I would argue, from a PMO perspective, I would definitely want us to work towards that compliance, because what it means is actually we don't need to keep chasing things up, because people are doing it because they need and see it. So I challenge that dream in terms of kind of how we choose to get there. In terms of PMO that kind of creates and just jobs, I would say very much the House PMO is trying to get to that space where PMOs recognise what their role is in the organisation and what their role can be in the organisation, the link between project, programme management, portfolio management and PMOs. So we can actually see that kind of career paths can be in and out of the PMO, into project management, out of project management, into programme management, into the PMO, but also be able to see that the PMO is a place where some business owners might, or some business managers might want to come in the PMO. So if they've been a project or a programme sponsor, they may actually see themselves, well, actually, I can contribute to defining how we do projects and supporting projects by going to work in the PMO. I think we've talked a bit about people kind of understanding about what a PMO is and actually kind of valuing it, and we can help that along the way. And there's a comment there on one of the post-it notes about a dream about having a PMO as common as finance and sales and marketing have in an IT firm, and that's exactly, if you go back and have a look at the mission and vision of the House of PMO, that's exactly what the House of PMO has been set up to do, to kind of, for people to recognize there's a profession and a way to go through that, and to kind of to make that commonplace. And I often say, when I fell into a PMO, I thought I died and gone to heaven, and I can't understand why careers teachers don't tell everybody about the PMO and what a wonderful place it is to work, because definitely that's my story when I look to aspiring students and new graduates about what they might want to do. I realize it isn't for everybody. It's a good place to start to get a picture of what's happening in your organization. So dream shot, moonshot, and I always kind of this is always kind of, I always kind of go to Lindsay for the definition of this. So this is about having something a bit different that actually makes things happen.
Well, it's about
I ask every time.
Well, I know, but you came up with a really clear definition last time, which is about, you know, if you're trying to get the rocket to the moon, it's about something that might feel like it's
too hard and unachievable.
Yes, but actually, you know,
we can make it happen.
It could happen.
Yeah.
But it feels something that's way out there. So,
yes.
So what we got?
And it's interesting, we've only got one on here, which is about getting that exec and getting that sponsor. And I do think it's a really interesting point about a lot of the success stories that we hear and people talk about at the conference is because they've got somebody who supports them and kind of paves the way for that PMO. So I think there's definitely, just thinking ahead, Lindsay, in terms of kind of things that we can do, is about actually running a session on how to get a sponsor for your PMO if you don't have one.
Yes, yeah, very good. I've just thought of one in relation to that one below about the dream, about having the PMO as a commonplace. What could be quite out there then is that actually project management is seen as business as usual, and it's not seen as outside that.
Oh, that's very contentious. Project management is business as usual.
Yeah. Because you can't have a PMO, it's the same department like IT, HR, blah, 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 because they're business as usual. Get your heads around that then. Can I put that on?
You can put that on, but I'm moving on. So let's have a look at kind of what people have tried that didn't work. First thing was adding a tool. Now it is lunchtime, but I often say it takes a person to muck things up. It takes a tool to things up. So adding tools that are beyond the kind of capability and understanding of the project management community and the PMO community can actually just kind of make it an awful lot worse. And I think where we're trying to put in processes and procedures, if the process and procedures haven't been formalized and we haven't demonstrated that they work, then when we put the tool in, people assume the tool is wrong and then throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it really, when we talk about this very much about kind of actually doing a pilot of kind of those processes and making sure that works before we then go on to kind of implement a tool that will kind of just make things worse. And just and I know you're there, Nicole, as our tools specialist, what would you add about trying to introduce tools into either a low maturity organization or a low maturity PMO?
Hi, Eileen. Yes, thanks for that. I was almost cheering in the background when that one came up. It is absolutely true. And from my perspective, I'd always recommend doing a maturity assessment first before you even go down that road of looking to implement something. And my recommendation is always, if you're not at least at a level 2 on that P3M scale that you shared earlier, there's other things you need to be doing first.
Yeah. And interesting, Nicole, I think I jumped to it, and I I'll clarify that you jumped to it as well. Is where we're talking about software tools there, we're tending to talk about kind of enterprise project management tools who hold all our plans and everything. There is a places that though Nicole, for kind of small, when we talk about kind of tools about some kind of good spreadsheet, things that
Absolutely.
yeah, and things
Always a place for that.
yeah, so that in terms of kind of skills and capabilities for people in the PMO, good Excel skills are a definite plus for people who are kind of going into the PMO, particularly a low maturity organization.
Yes.
Thank you for that, Nicole. If anybody needs any tools, Nicole's the world. She's actually one of our lodgers as well in the House of PMO, and runs the tool shed for us. Looks after the tool shed. So if you've got any questions specifically about tools, you can find her on the House of PMO website. Interestingly, we've got just a post-it note that's been filled in there about no flexibility or adaptability in the processes or procedures. So, and I think this also goes along with kind of bullet 3 there, which is about writing a long and complicated delivery method. In recognizing, and I think it came up, and I didn't pick up the point specifically at the time, about recognizing that there's different levels of capability across an organization and across the people who are doing projects and programs. And if you put in something that's hugely simplistic or hugely sophisticated, then actually you're going to lose something at other ends of the stream. And one of the kind of recommendations which we'll come on to is actually we're better off starting to put in place a minimum set of things that have to be delivered, but recognizing that those project managers, program managers who are more experienced, actually they can do a lot more than that minimum set of artifacts that we define around projects and programs, and we can look at how best to support them. But we also want to embrace those experienced project and program management to help us kind of move through and develop our delivery method and our tools to match the maturity of the organization and the capability of the individuals who are going to be using those tools and processes. The optionality in terms of, kind of, and I've worked with a number of organizations where we say, there's always these stages, but actually in certain situations, you can actually merge these two stages of a project, or we've got the potential for 127 different artifacts, but actually on this particular project, we're happy that you only do 18, or actually, you want to do 127 and anything in between. And so providing some guidelines in terms of how you decide on that. But what we have to be very clear on is where the accountability lies to ensure that the minimum set is always completed. Just reading you what you've written there, Rothio, in terms of didn't work to increase understanding of collaboration. Right. Sorry,
that about the working rules.
yes.
Is it because it was too rigid, or it was just seemed to be that you were dictating, or what was the? I'm intrigued to know why it didn't work.
So I don't know whether you want to take yourself off mute, Rothio,
or just pop it into the chat. It'd be lovely to know why. I'm intrigued with that one.
So tools and complicated method, and I think what we're trying to do with tools and complicated method is jump essentially from level kind of 1 or level 0 up to level 2 and 3 in one fell swoop. And you do have to go through those different stages of maturity to get up to level 2 and level 3. So you do have to kind of work through and make a difference. So more helpful then, what have we tried that's actually kind of helped in these situation? And this whole kind of concept of keep it simple, let's work for direction of travel rather than achieve this kind of huge milestone much further on down the line. And third bullet point I find is really interesting in terms of switching from an admin PMO. And there has been lots of kind of conversations about whether you know, kind of whether a PMO does admin or not, and people are absolutely you know, adamant and banging the table, we're not an administration function. And I have a kind of a slightly kind of different view in that I kind of think we can do administration, however we can do lots more. So it's about managing expectations about how much of our role is administration. What I really liked at the conference we did, not in June, but last November, where we had the PMO team who are rolling out the vaccine, they said their biggest value add to that program was the administration and secretariat services they had, because each meeting that was held on a daily basis was absolutely critical, was to get the decisions out, to get the next agenda out, to get the inputs for the next meeting, was actually what made a significant difference. So, you know, recognizing that, yes, admin is some of our role, it's not all of our role, and moving on to some of those other services will help people recognize their PMO to be more than that admin role, but also to support project and program managers in delivery, which I think is that, you know, kind of that second bullet point there in terms of kind of coaching and mentoring. So rather than kind of spend all of our time kind of preaching and trying to kind of make big changes, actually do that kind of incremental change by getting one more advocate, one more supporter along the PMO, providing kind of tools and support, and gradually kind of working our way around the delivery team so they're on board. And you know, if we're doing the coaching and mentoring, I've kind of jumped to the delivery team, recognizing that we can actually do kind of coaching and mentoring for program and project sponsors as well at the same time. And that last bullet point really kind of says to me, you know, kind of that's probably the biggest message, is actually don't, you know, kind of wish you were somewhere else. Do recognize where you are now. And exactly as Nicole said, doing some kind of maturity assessment. You don't need to kind of get consultants in to give you a P3M3 assessment. There are a number of models out there that are free, both the Kersner model and the one on Praxis. It is actually free for you to use, just to recognize where you're at, so you know your starting point and you don't want to kind of jump to somewhere where you're which is too big a step. So in terms of things that people are want to try, and recognizing that we've already kind of talked and made some suggestions as we've kind of gone through the session, there's a couple of other elements that have been mentioned, apart from the fact that recognizing benefits realization is hard, which I thought was a great kind of observation. So that's obviously stuck on the too hard pile, and I have to say benefits management has been on the too hard pile for a long time, and it's been usurped relatively recently in the last kind of 12 to 18 months by resource management, but for a lot of it, it's actually kind of on there. So just a couple of things in terms that have been suggested in terms of automating some of the process. So some of those administrative tasks that we do, kind of all that kind of cutting and pasting, looking at robotic process automation. We've done a session on that in terms of kind of trying to automate some of those administrative processes, will actually kind of give us some headroom to do some of the other value adding activities. Got this, I love the endorsement of attending the conference and kind of being a member of the House of PMO actually kind of helps to kind of move forward. And then two other things, which one we've talked about, which is actually kind of getting in a position where we start articulating the value of the PMO and what are the kind of key metrics and measures. And again, in the House of PMO library, we've got a good paper on what that looks like, and we've run a couple of sessions. So if you're thinking about kind of doing that, we provide access to that. The second bullet point, actually, again, is one of those bits where you definitely got some traction in terms of trying to get sponsors at the next level in the organization. So a lot of PMOs spend a lot of their time developing relationships with the delivery team, but actually kind of going, you know, kind of back up the project management tree in terms of kind of seeing, you know, kind of what are the sponsors doing, who develops the strategy, who looks after and pulls that kind of portfolio together, is a good place for us to work. So just conscious of the time, and I know a few of you will be leaving in a moment. Just the last thing in terms of what's actually stopping people, and it's back to this kind of hearts and minds. And there is an interesting bit around change management, and I think that's another session that we can perhaps do, not just about the sponsors, but actually kind of helping you through understanding the change management process and doing the hearts and mind change and what that might look like in a PMO context. And we've certainly got one of our lodgers, Zoe O'Toole, who very much is around that kind of change management element in terms of kind of how to drive that forward. So definitely, I think that that will help. So conscious it was a bit of a whistle stop tour around the back end of that, but really hopefully you've kind of we've certainly taken quite a bit more out of that conversation, because this is kind of what we're really trying to be about in terms of what else can we do to help people, how to support people on, you know, kind of being in a low maturity organization or being in a low maturity PMO. So we've identified a couple of sessions that we can run. If anybody wants to kind of go through and have a conversation about the PMO competency framework, we can kind of definitely do that and help. Nicole's put in there a word of caution on assessing own maturity, and I think there's potentially a session there where we can talk about, if you're going to do a maturity assessment and you want to do it yourselves, some of the do's and don'ts, and perhaps some of the benefits of having external consultants come in and do that is potentially another session we can pick up on. So if you have got any suggestions, kind of drop them in chat. Go to the House of PMO. There's contact hello@thehouseofpmo.com.
Yep.
They can drop us a line. Lindsay will be, as ever, kind of wrapping all of this up and putting something digestible out there via LinkedIn, newsletter and blog post. So do feel free to kind of comment on those, and we'll continue to support you. So that's us from today. We've now finished all of this summer series, and we're working now, and we'll in the next week or so we'll be telling you what our next sessions are in terms of the next kind of series of events.
Yeah, so basically what's come out of the summer series is a number of different things that people wanted to see, that all fit around these 4 subjects. So yeah, we carry on delving deeper and deeper, and so hopefully we'll see you soon for the next session. There's actually one coming up on Friday morning, 8 AM UK time. We're doing it, we've been invited to talk at the South African PMO forum. So we're going to be talking to them about some of the stuff we've been doing House PMO, but it's actually more about taking control of your PMO career. So if you're interested, get yourself across to the website, have a look at the events, and we've got stuff coming up next week as well. So have a look.
Brilliant.
Yeah, take care.
Nice to see you all. Have a great day.